Welcome to the Weird Warriors podcast. I'm Max.
I'm Rich.
And on this podcast, we will be focusing on the Weird War Tales comic book series published by DC Comics from 1971 to 1983. On this episode in particular, we are taking a look at Weird War Tales number 75, people. But first, Rich has a little something to say to you.
In the process of doing one of my show-related projects, I realized that I had left Arnold Drake off the list of WWT creators that had seen military service. A World War II Army veteran that served during the Battle of the Bulge and had 3 campaign stars. His work appeared in 15 issues of the comic. Deepest apologies, Mr. Drake. I'll call out everyone's service on the show and do so here. He died in 2007. Also, in Weird War Tales 71, we talked about the 3 sailors aboard the battleship West Virginia who died after being trapped below decks for over 2 weeks after the Pearl Harbor attack. I mentioned in passing the similar circumstances of sailors aboard the capsized battleship Oklahoma. I found a book written by one of those sailors trapped for over 30 hours in Turret 4, Trapped at Pearl Harbor, by Stephen Bauer Young, published in 1991. It's less than 200 pages and a fairly fast read. Pick that one up for more details. Bad air, pitch black, water rising. Will they escape in time? Spoiler. They do. Intel report. Wars in Toyland, a hardcover graphic novel published by Oni Press in 2013. Script by Joe Harris, art by Adam Polina. Toyland was once a place of wonder and beauty, at least until the Teddy dictator Roxbury took over. After Matthew's brother and playmate, Alex, disappears, Matthew finds himself carried into Toyland by his own loyal toy soldiers. Matthew soon learns that Alex had been here too, held captive by Roxbury. Leading an attack on the teddy bear's fortress, Matthew never considers that his brother might be beyond saving. Cover detail. Art by Joe Kubert. The mystery and madness is still yours for 40 cents. Weird War Tales is yellow on a blue sky background. 3 thrillers in 1 issue. The uniformed skeletons of 3 GIs stand on a Sherman tank facing the viewer. A red futuristic tank with a swastika on the turret faces the Sherman. The red tank's commander is in a helmeted spacesuit pointing at the Sherman and yelling. Cover date, May 1979. Date of release, February 13th, 1979. On Comics Man. Seen on eBay for anywhere between $7 and $50. I don't see any killjoy, but Max, what do you got?
Well, I'll say if there's a better example of a basics of composition cover out there, I'm pretty sure I haven't seen it. Still, the basics have that name for a reason, and they are super effective here. The future Nazi's arm and finger point into the background right along with the cannon of his laser tank, and even the colored streams in the sky beckon us to the background, where the 3 skeletal soldiers stand in successive regressing order of height, carrying the intended vanishing point line along with the tops of their very skulls. Sure, I'll lob my usual criticism of late that this looks like another quickie cover with a few large objects atop a more or less blank background, but the effect of the overall composition puts me in a more forgiving mood this time around, so I liked it.
This is without a doubt one of the best covers in the series. Hubert absolutely crushes it. I totally remember this one from the first reading, and this was probably one of the first issues of the title I bought. Talk about a haunted tank. The panicked enemy commander is no doubt giving the command to fire. The swastika has soft futuristic angles, and the cannon has an odd muzzle to it. Like, what does this thing fire? The Sherman may be an antique, but it's still imposing as hell, and kind of makes the future tank look like a toy in comparison. Oh yeah, let's freaking go. Moving on. The introduction page. Art by Only Timer, John Kalman. Death holds a scythe and wears the uniform of a World War II GI while standing in the turret of a tank stopped in front of a pile of rubble. Behind him, from the sunset, surges warriors from every war in history as 3 spaceships zoom overhead. Death says,
Across the ages, only one thing is ever present: the unexplained. There are always events beyond human understanding, and many of them in the midst of mankind's greatest struggles. I am death, and only my advance is truly inexorable. Over the millennia, nothing has ever stood in my way. For I have many allies in the weird war, and ours is the only ultimate victory. Listen well, and I will tell you of my deeds.
no, Killjoy. The turret hatch directly behind Death kind of makes him look like a fatty, and his face is a touch too cartoonish for my taste. The cannon barrel looks too thin, looks more like a pipe. In fact, the tank itself has this overall toyish quality to it. But I like all the action in the background and the sunset effect a lot. This is tough. I'm not familiar with John Cullen's work. There's a lot I like here, and a lot I don't. I'm putting this one right on the fulcrum point of the pile.
The dreaded Fulham Fulcrum. The word I'd use for this one is perfunctory. It technically does all the things, but it does so in the least impressive way possible. The tank, like Rich said, looks too much like a toy, even for the likes of me, as do the spaceships above and really everything else. If the artist had just really gone for a bunch of toys effect and put a little more creative effort into the affair, that could have been really cool. But it seems a little more effort was not on the menu for this serving of intro page mediocrity.
First up, The Forgery, 6 pages. Script by Martin Pasco, aka Wyatt Guan. Pencils by Last Timer Mike Sikowski. Inks by Romeo Tangal. World War II, occupied Amsterdam. Unscrupulous Dutch art dealer Carl Gustav enters the shop of watchmaker Hans von Ginnemer and introduces himself. Extraordinary work, my friend. And I see by these paintings that your work is not restricted to watch cases. Splendid. I'd almost take this one for a Vermeer. Yes, I was fond of Vermeer as a student. I spent hours copying. Gustav interrupts. Would you like to do some work for me? Restoration. I have a damaged Vermeer, a Christ at Emos. Von Ginnemer is shocked. A Christ? Vermeer painted no Christ. A certain customer is willing to buy it, but it needs extensive work. You see, the canvas is blank. Sir, you are speaking of forgery. These paintings of yours, you have talent. You studied. So why are you growing old in a watch shop? The war? The critics were rough on you? I understand you. If you could give the world a masterpiece, a thing of beauty, what would be wrong with that? A painting's value lies in its quality, not in the signature. Signing it is the crime, not painting it. You wouldn't have to sign it. Gustav was persuasive. Ben Gimir set to work on painting the Christ, never knowing who the customers were. When the painting was complete, Gustav presented it to a Nazi army officer whose office was filled with works of art. Magnificent, Herr Gustav. I only hope it's genuine. You are having a joke with me, Captain. My reputation is impeccable. Ah, yes, a joke. It's amusing to think that your government would shoot you for selling us genuine national art treasures, while we would shoot you for selling us fakes. What creates these ambiguities, mein Herr? The transaction complete, Gustav leaves the German headquarters, only to run into Van Genemeer outside. Gustav? You're selling to them? Calm yourself. They don't suspect you. If you create a scene, I'll send them straight to you. And now you're in as deep as I. Over the following weeks, Van Genemeer works harder than ever. He even asks Gustav to sit for a portrait every evening until curfew, to practice for the masterpieces he had yet to make. And every evening after Gustav leaves, Genemeer goes to the back of the shop to work on another project, a clockwork humanoid, using the painting of Gustav for reference. But one night, Van Genemeer's work is interrupted by German soldiers. You are wanted for questioning at Gestapo headquarters tomorrow morning at 10 sharp in connection with some paintings. Gustav had told him he's a dead man. The knock at the door is Gustav, and Van Genemeer lets him in. I came to make sure you wouldn't panic. I had to tell them. Mein Herr Gustav, I must leave Amsterdam. I have friends who can get me out. What? And put my head on the block? Don't worry, you didn't sign those paintings. They'll let you off. I fear to trust in the forgiveness of Nazis. Now don't you go running off or I'll tell them that too. Then I have no choice. Van Genemeer stuffs a rag soaked in ether into Gustav's mouth, rendering the art dealer unconscious. The painter works quickly, shaving Gustav's face and head to resemble his own appearance, and altering the photos in his own identity papers to resemble those of the shaven dealer. A second dose of ether, and Hans van Genemeer puts pajamas on Gustav, puts him to bed, and leaves Amsterdam forever. Dawn. An insistent hammering at the door rouses Gustav before it flies open and a squad of Germans storm in. On your feet, Van Genemeer! You're under arrest for deceiving the Reich with worthless fakes, the officer in charge bellows. What? Who? I'm not him! The officer reviews his papers and smiles as soldiers pull Gustav to his feet. You have his face, his papers, you sleep in his bed, but you are not him. Who cleared up this little mistake at Gestapo headquarters? The officer points at a self-portrait painting of Van Genemeer in the style of Rembrandt. Take that with us. Most convincing evidence. All the way to Gestapo headquarters, Gustav argued, cajoled, pleaded, but to no avail. His shock is endless as he passes himself walking in the other direction. Guten Tag, I see you apprehended the faker. Heil Hitler! The German officer smiles and greets Gustav back. Duly, as the replica saunters off into the sunlight, Gustav realized that he himself was now a fake, destined to join his merchandise on the junk heap. Killjoy History Minute. We have our traditional black on red on white coloring gaff of Nazi banners in the last two panels of the story, which is irritating because it was right everywhere else. While I like the haha ending, this level of technology doesn't exist today, let alone in the early 40s. How long until it needs winding? Where do the voice patterns come from? How does he see to know when to talk to people he knows? The more you think about it, the more the ending falls apart. A simple switching places ploy might have made more sense here. Emmaus is a small village near Jerusalem, by the way. Johann Vermeer, October 1632 to 15 December 1675, was a Dutch painter who specialized in domestic interior scenes of middle-class life. He's considered one of the greatest painters of the Dutch Golden Age. During his lifetime, he was a moderately successful provincial genre painter. He produced relatively few paintings, 50 of which 32 survive, primarily earning his living as an art dealer. Vermeer's works went mostly unnoticed by art historians during the 2 centuries following his death. Although select connoisseurs of the Netherlands did appreciate his work, many of his paintings were attributed to the then better-known artists as Gabriel Metsu or Frans van Meers the Elder. The modern revival of interest in Vermeer began in the 1860s when German museum director Gustav Wagen recognized the hand of Vermeer in the Zernen Gallery in Vienna, where the art of painting had been misattributed to Pieter der Hoeksch. Page 2, panel 2. Van Gemeer says that Vermeer painted no Christ, but apparently he did. Christ in the House of Martha and Mary was finished in 1655 and is now in the Scottish National Gallery in Edinburgh. It is the largest painting by Vermeer, 63 inches by 56 inches. It is one of the very few with an overt religious subject. That panel is actually an art call-out. The shadows of the 2 men in front of the window in contrast to the German Kubelwagen driving by outside with 3 soldiers in it. The painting on the wall in the next panel of a woman is almost certainly meant to be a girl with a pearl earring, made around 1665 and on display in a museum in The Hague. Photos of both in the album.
Hey, yeah, I got to drop in and say, before we get to the CNC, yeah, the technology does not exist in today or when this story was set. But look at any 1940s comic where the bad guy has robot henchmen. How do you build any of that? And if he could, why did he have to resort to crime? You just have to go, hey, at some point. But I'll let that roll into my comments and commendations on this opening story. Now, right on the very first page, I'm getting Gold Key vibes. Like this story was originally destined for an issue of Grimm's Ghost Stories. So I'm kind of predisposed to like this one right at the start. Sikowski knows how to draw people with varying body types and faces to the point where even the passersby look unique and interesting. In fact, everything in this story has a visual character to it, and I ended up being super entertained by it, even though almost every bit of it is just a series of conversations. You know, I love a good page design, and especially one that makes a meal out of a potential talking head scenario. And you need to look no further than page 2 for a great example of just that very thing. Such good storytelling, uses of shifting perspective, scene setting that reminds you of the stakes. See the aforementioned in Rich's History Minute, SS car rumbling by in panel 2, to Gustav literally leaving the scene for the page turn in the final panel. I enjoyed the heck out of this little tale of a decent guy getting in over his head and finally deciding he'd had just about enough, even if we only got one brief panel of our hapless hero building the quite frankly amazingly complex, again as Rich mentioned, clockwork doppelganger. Good vibes at the start for me. I'm in at the top of this issue.
Our first clockwork humanoid since that outstanding Sam Glanzman story in the second WWT redeployment issue, The Elopement. That one was better. Fare thee well, Mike Sikowski. Our splash panel is great. Gustav outside Van Genemeer's watch shop peering in the window as sullen civilians trudge by behind him under the watchful eye of a German soldier with a tank in the background and death narrating from the lower right corner. Page 3, panel 2. Our fat German officer in the white dress uniform surrounded by art pieces I mistook for Hermann Goering at first. And the later Gator, page 5, panel 7, as the watchmaker disappears into the night really works for me. This reminds me of a Twilight Zone story, but I'd be damned if I can remember which one. Despite my qualms over the ending, this is still a pretty good tale.
Yeah, kind of unfair to compare it to the elopement, but I can see where you draw the parallels, but okay, yeah, the elopement was better. Shocker. So, rolling on from that first story, we have our second tale in this issue, and it's called Fire of the Gods. It's 5 pages long. Script is by Paul Kupperberg, pencils by first timer Don Heck. Inks by also first-timer Army veteran John Solardo. Synopsis for this one goes like this. 334 BC. Alexander the Great set out from Macedonia to conquer the known world. By the year 330 BC, Alexander was but 26 years old, already king of all the lands east and south of his home country. But even then, these conquests were not enough. Deep on an expedition into India, his forces find the small village of Chaichung, home of merchants. They have no army, yet the other villages seem to fear them. Alexander wants to make a profit from the expedition and sweeps his forces into the village. Only the village elders greet them. I am called Chang, and these are Lu and Khan. You would be Alexander of Macedonia that travelers have spoken of. I am Alexander, son of Philip, king of Macedonia, God on earth for all of Egypt, conqueror of Persia, Egypt, Babylon, Asia Minor, and now your little village. Unless you were thinking of fighting the mightiest army on earth. We wish no combat, Alexander, only peace. The people of Chai Chung are merchants, not soldiers. That is why we sought out this valley so far from home. To avoid war. Then avoid it you shall, old man. For your new master has no desire to harm his subjects. Alexander dismounts his steed and goes to rest. That night, a victory feast is commanded by the conquerors. Alexander dines with the village elders. Tell me, Khan, my scout tells me the neighboring villages fear the merchants of Chaichung, yet you have no army. Why is that? We have developed resources to protect ourselves from attackers. We are secure in this valley. Ha! Secure, you say? Yet my armies took your village without a fight. But you will be leaving soon, moving on to your next conquest, and we shall be free again. Free? You have been conquered by Alexander, proclaimed god of thunder by the pharaoh of Egypt and ruler of the earth. Look to the skies, old men. See the clouds which the displeasure of Alexander have summoned to rain upon your pitiful village. He gestures to the sky. Black thunderclouds fill the night skies with all the fury of nature unleashed. Imagine if I brought this power down upon these huts. The elders scoff. Your childish prattling begins to irritate, Alexander. This is a storm we've known was coming for days. You have no more power than the grazing sheep, and we shall tolerate your presence no more. You and your men must leave our village. Alexander is incensed. You dare speak so to Alexander the Great? I am your king, and you shall pay for your insolence. Guards, arrest these men. No, Alexander, you shall not arrest us. You will leave our village or face the fire of the gods. Khan gestures to a nearby hut, which explodes in an unnatural light. Alexander is stunned by the display as Khan continues. We do not wish to take any life with this power, but we shall if you do not depart. Alexander recovers quickly. No, this miserable village is mine to keep, and keep it I shall, even if blood must be spilled to do it. Alexander dons his armor and prepares to fight. Only the village elders meet Alexander's army on the plains in front of the village. He has chosen to ignore our warning. He has left us with no choice. Do what you must, Lou. A flaming torch touches the ground in front of the charging army, and the swiftly approaching thunder of hooves is suddenly silenced by the fire of the gods. A titanic explosion that rends the field before Alexander's men. The mightiest army on earth flees, and the elders watch them run. They shall not return. It is indeed a blessing that many years ago in China, my father discovered that saltpeter and charcoal mixed with other ingredients makes this powder which explodes. It has kept our people safe. It wouldn't be for another 1,000 years until gunpowder would once again be discovered in China. The end.
No killjoy that I can see. The infamous 5-page story that takes up 11 pages of the issue because of ad placement. I hate it when they do this. Historically, this is well outside my wheelhouse, so it's hard for me to killjoy this one. Around 326 BC, Alexander's armies had reached the Ganges River in India before his weary armies mutinied and demanded to return home. Could scouts have potentially run into a village with access to gunpowder? Not completely out of the question. Interesting to think about. Don Heck gives me solid Sal and John Buscema vibes. Page 4, panel 1, for example. Sidebar, I updated Heck's Wikipedia entry to reflect his 2 issues of WWT work. Our deathly narrator in period garb is spectacular, easily one of the best ones we've seen this side of Alfredo Alcala. All of page 1 rocks. The attention to detail, the action of the dusty charge into the village, and the reaction of Alexander's men and horse to the page 5, panel 3 explosion is aces. I love the whole, whatever Thor, we knew that storm was coming days ago, shade the elders threw at Alexander, too. Never underestimate your opponent, hero. This was fun, even if the damn page placement crippled the flow of the story.
Yeah, I left it to you to mention that because that's a favorite one for you to bring up. The fact that they slapped like I don't know 7 ads in the middle of this 5-page story. It's ridiculous. You called out all of page 1, and I agree. I gotta wonder if this letterer, and I didn't have time to research it in particular, did a lot of work with Don Heck throughout his career because the lettering of the title is kind of a lettering style I associate with Don Heck's work, and I kind of assumed he did his own lettering, and it looks like he did not. It's got that kind of like flat but angular, hard to describe, but when I see it, I think of Heck's work on Dial H for Hero and even The Flash and stuff. Like, I wonder if this is like a Walt Simonson, John Workman situation where they just work together so often that you associate them with each other, but maybe someone else out there knows. Now, as for my scripted CNC, I'll say I am a known Don Heck booster, and he does not make it difficult to carry on in that role with his work on these few pages. I do think the script here quite literally cramps his style in too many places, especially on pages 3 and 4. But when you can see what he's doing, Heck's virtues come through as clearly as they can, especially in the drapery of the clothing on every figure in the story. And Alexander's cape, just awesome. Every time it appears, just Heck is the master of drapery. His work on romance comics will show you that. And also as Rich mentioned, Buscema-like expressions that are exaggerated just enough to add to the fun. For a five-pager, though, and I don't attribute this to the ads interrupting it, the actual story felt like kind of a slog. There's a lot of repetition of "we get it, Alexander's a jerk, these guys have a secret, bum bum bum." And the characterization was a little too blunt, even for an issue of Weird War Tales. I did appreciate Heck for giving us a couple of great foreground fugitives in the aforementioned page 5, panel 3. Those guys are fantastic. Those are a couple of all-timers right there. So I'm hoping that since Rich just revealed Heck only shows up one more time, that he gets a better script that allows him to strut his stuff more next time around.
Last up, Ghost Patrol. 6 pages, script by Bob Lazakis, pencils by Only Timer, George Rupert, inks by Dan Adkins. It's the cover story. August 1st, 1944, somewhere in France. A Sherman tank chases a Panzer down a forested, rain-swept road. But before the Sherman can fire at the fleeing Panzer, it runs into a two-sided ambush. Two hidden Panzers simultaneously fire at the perusing Sherman as a lightning bolt also strikes the American tank. When the 4 American crewmen rouse, they sound off. Moose Hobart of the St. Louis Browns, requesting first base after that beanball. Danny James, grocer with a special on first aid kits. Steve Rickert, educator, completing the attendance check. Captain Nick Greco isn't impressed. You guys ought to get a job in the movies like the Marx Brothers. A simple, we're okay, would have been fine. The questions start piling up as they dismount the tank. It was a sunny day. Where did the thunderstorm go? More important, where did the enemy tank go? And the road under their tracks hadn't been paved before. Something weird's going on. The only possible explanation is that after they'd been stunned, the tank had kept moving. Somewhere else. But where? There are no paved roads on the map. Attempts to raise HQ on both primary and backup frequencies on the radio only get static. But before any other attempt can be made to figure out what's going on, the call goes out. Enemy tanks coming this way. Captain Greco orders their tank off the road and into the woods. They're completely unprepared for what soon comes clanking down the road. Two low-slung tanks with transparent turrets and a swastika-like emblem on their hulls. As the Americans watch from their hidden vantage point, the enemy tanks drive onto opposite shoulders of the road and set up an ambush. Captain Greco doesn't like it. Since they didn't spot us, we've got a chance to turn the tables on them, and quickly outlines his plan. Moments later, a third futuristic enemy tank comes charging down the road, pursued by a similarly designed tank sporting a large white star on its green hull. The enemy trap is set, but Greco and Hobart sneak up on one of the parked tanks. One of the crewmen turned towards Hobart, but somehow doesn't see him as the pitcher hurls a grenade. The explosion destroys the first tank. That's the signal for the Sherman to fire, blasting the second parked tank. The future U.S. tank fires its laser cannon and knocks out the last enemy tank. The future tank stops and two crewmen dismount, shocked. How did we take out 3 tanks with one shot? Greco jogs over. Captain, what outfit are you hooked up with? Captain, can he see me or hear me? The other 2 crewmen talk amongst themselves. I would have sworn I saw another tank, an antique, firing at the German one, but there's nothing there. Nothing on the videotape recon either, Captain. Must be battle fatigue. Or a ghost. A mirage! The 2 future tankers mount up and move out, leaving Greco's men in stunned silence. Ghosts? Hobart exclaims. Could we be dead? Impossible. We just took out 2 tanks. Ghosts can't do that. So what's the answer? Wish I knew. I really wish I knew. Killjoy. The swastikas on the turrets of the World War II Panzers on page 1 need to be rotated 45 degrees to make them accurate. That being said, they wouldn't be swastikas, but German crosses on the turrets. Yeah, I know, you're trying to establish the link between 1940s Nazis and 2040 Nazis, but I think any reader of a war comic can make that connection on their own. Also, none of the crewmen are wearing helmets, and Captain Greco is wearing an infantry one, not an armor one. based on page 1, panel 1. Danny James is the driver. So why do you tell Gunner Moose Hobart to drive the tank off the road in page 3, panel 5? Page 4, panel 1. That is one roomy tank. And everyone can just look out the view slit. Page 5, panel 4. The spoon hasn't flown off that grenade. And can we just say it's a good thing all these antique weapons work against future tanks?
Hey man, it's like a lot in a lot of sci-fi. Before I get to my CNC, there's that trope of everyone's using energy weapons, so they're not prepared for plain old kinetic force. Maybe that was an unwritten advantage they had in this story. So, kicking off comments and commendations here for real, I'll say the opening page of this one is a real banger and easily my favorite of the entire affair. That's partially because, unlike my co host, I find the use of oddly angled panels to be overdone and more like arbitrarily applied throughout the rest of the story. It's like the artist, who is otherwise a decent Neil Adams alike, he really is, saw someone do these kinds of panels once and decided that this was the way to make his work stand out. Yes, as I said earlier in this very episode, I am a page design and layout nerd. That's actually why I find most of these pages more irritating than appealing. I'd say the second best composition for me comes on page 5, where the attempts at shaking up the standard layout seem to actually be designed to add to the flow of the action, especially with the pop-out grenade working really well to tie it all together and direct your eyes across the page appropriately. But again, the first page is great, with the lightning strike blossoming into the title logo right above the soldier's head, like a super painful marquee. And for some reason, I like the helmeted host head, even if it's just pasted there and saying nothing. Not sure why, but I do. I mean, it's a really good drawing, so that probably helps. As for the story, I was really left wishing that this could be followed up on. But then I was also left not being sure how it could be. I don't think there's much mileage left to explore in this particular future, especially since the ghostly grunts can't be really perceived by anyone unless they decide to blow something to smithereens. But I do like the idea of a tank and its crew being the ghosts rather than being haunted by one. I don't know. Maybe that's all the gas that's in this particular tank, but I did have fun with this tale, and I sat around trying to imagine its continuation for quite a while ever since. So that's not bad. And I'll add on to my scripted comments here that it gave me a vibe of a strip that like Kirby would have experimented with launching. It had a very Jack Kirby vibe of like, don't think about it, just go. And the characters introducing themselves after the Nazi hit with the unnecessary expository stuff and the wisecracks. It did have a very Kirby war comic feel to it, especially with all the shenanigans going on that Rich kind of alluded to and the inaccuracies in it that just serve the telling of the story. So this is one that, again, I'm still right now thinking of how would they have kept going with this, because I kind of want to see these characters in this situation again. So mission accomplished, you know?
August 1st, 1944 was when the Allied breakout from the Normandy beachhead, Operation Cobra, really got rolling. The German army would go into a headlong retreat all the way to the German border that would last well into autumn, when the Allied forces literally ran out of gas due to overextended supply lines. So I like the Sherman chasing a Panzer scene we start the story with. Not that one reader in 100 would make my connection. I also like how Razakis decided to dust off a St. Louis Browns reference when the crew was sounding off on page 2, panel 2. We've talked about them a bit in past episodes. In 1954, that team became the Baltimore Orioles. To the story itself, another story with magic lightning. I'm all in on the non-traditional panel layouts, unlike my co-host. Floating panels, borderless panels, broken borders. I'll just post all of page 6 for my example. By the way, panel 1, the future US tank fires with a flip sound effect. Somewhere Spider-Man is calling Matt Murdock. Trademark violation! Panel 3, nothing on the videotape recon. It's just like watching the original Star Trek episodes now, isn't it? Panel 6, Captain Greco just transformed into Sergeant Rock. I mean, come on. The story leaves you in a weird place. Did the Germans start World War III? When will we ever learn? Are the Americans ghosts or temporal travelers? I loved this one from the first time.
Yeah, man, just before we jump on it, I wanted to mention excellent call out on the sound effect thing. That's usually my territory. And when I read that in your script, I had to go back and look and I'm like, how did I just glaze over that? Such an egregiously bad sound effect.
I think it took me, it was like my third reading. I think I was like going over my CNC and I'm like, the whip, I'm like, oh, hell no. The
And
command of the
also
tanker, laser fire.
and also like the videotape reference. That's one of my favorite parts of like reading stuff set in the future that was written a long time ago is the technological mismatches of their predictions. So that was a fun thing for you to point out again because I also went back after that and went back and went like, oh yeah, the videotape recon. That's cute. Yeah. So
Well, we've
anyway,
we've talked about that a lot on the show.
yeah,
Was retrofuturism.
love it.
Where they talk about something that was like for the sake of argument, it's like a 1940 cartoon, and they're talking about the year 2000, and that's like
Ooh.
25 years in our past.
Yeah.
And you're like, ooh,
The
like the
Conan O'Brien skit in the year 2000.
well, what was the other one? The Transformers movie. The year
Yes.
is 2005.
Oh man, my favorite in the year 1994. Love it. I was raised in it. I'm soaking in it at all times. Retro futurism for the win. So, Rich is going to kick off our next section of the story before we go off on Tangent Town forever here. It's a visit to the letters page, known as the APO Weird War Tales section of the show.
And I'm going to cheat like a mother and take the shortest letter in probably APO Weird Wars Tales history, but it talked to me, so yeah, sure, why not? Our little missive is from George Jindal from Evanston, Illinois. And he just writes two sentences. Dear Paul, I've noticed that recently GI Combat has started to run stories as they announce as bizarre battle stories. Are these from your inventory? And Paul responds with, no, but they're usually done by writers and artists who have worked for Weird War Tales at one time or another. Since GI Combat is one of our big dollar comics, editor Murray Boltonoff likes to interject a variety of themes. So occasionally he uses a story that might fit in these pages. If you're not getting your quota of Weird War Tales here, you might try picking up that mag. Yeah, a lot of the covers from those big GI combats will say a Weird War Tale or something to that effect on them. I've thought about maybe doing a compilation episode of Weird War stories in the Big Five books, a la that Visiting the Next Five episode we did a few years ago. There's no timetable on that yet, but it's definitely something I'm thinking about doing.
Yeah, and Rich is in charge of timetables for this show. That's for sure. So my letter starts out with the expected intro of Dear Paul. Weird War Tales number 70 was a bit of a disappointment to me after the strong showing you've had in your last few issues. Ever since number 65, each issue has had a theme, feeling that set it off from the others and gave it a special quality and left it strong in my memory. Number 70 had none of that. The Dominguez cover started things off on the wrong foot because I've never been a great fan of his work. Whew, man, you just fell off from the rest of this show here, buddy. Kubert's visions have always seemed truer to the title of the magazine than Dominguez's. I think that's highly disputable. There just isn't enough of the war aspect of the mag reflected in his work. The Ayers Adkins job also disappointed me. There was something missing from the combination, especially when I compared it to the lovely work that Ayers and Tangal or Taleok do on the Unknown Soldier series. Nino's work was a brighter spot, but since he had been featured last issue, it didn't excite me as much as it should have. Please try to make sure your artists always vary from issue to issue. I hope you're back on track next time. And that lovely piece of communication was from John Elliott, 393 East 58th Street, Brooklyn, New York, 11203. And Paul responds as follows, and nicer than I would have, but also more interestingly than I would have. Weird War 70 wasn't all we wanted it to be either, John. You see, the decision to change from 50-cent to 40-cent magazines was made so suddenly that we literally had to take the completed pages of numbers 70 and 71 and reshuffle them like a deck of cards. The final result was two reasonably solid issues, in our opinion, but our more idyllic preferences like issue to issue balance had to be sacrificed. However, that problem is now past us. So the reason I appreciated this one, because I really disagreed pretty much all the way down with John Elliott's assessments there. And his like, I saw Nino last time. You got to see Nino 2 issues in a row. How about you shut up and enjoy it, okay? But I like the fact that this was an airing of grievances from inside the house on Paul Kupperberg's part. A little shot across the bow at editorial or marketing or whoever it is that made the decision for that price change and page count reduction at the last minute. You hardly ever see even a guy like Paul, who I've met and is certainly someone who speaks his mind. He's usually pretty company man in these letters pages, but this was the first glimmer of the kind of the Paul Kupperberg I've spoken to at Terrificon, where he's like taking a little shot at, yeah, we know that issue wasn't that great, but we were tap dancing on hot coals, okay? So I like that. So there we go. That's the letters page. That's the story content of the issue. You know what comes next, people? It's our spotlighted ads. Mine is a full page ad from Mego Corp, and it starts off with the exclamation, "Here they are! Batman and Robin with magnetic hands and feet." And you have a picture of Batman and Robin swinging across 2 panels in a kind of trapeze act situation. And Robin is saying, "Holy magnets! This is what I call a sticky situation." And then they're continuing on their trapeze act. They're climbing up the side of a building. I don't know what part of Batman Robin's holding onto in the bottom panel, and I don't want to think about it. The text continues on to say, "Imagine the adventures you can create with these new big 12.5-inch superheroes, Batman and Robin, now more dynamic than ever with magnetic hands and feet that stick to almost any metal." Well, as long as it's ferrous, even each other. Both are fully posable and ready for any crime-fighting action. And there's the Mego Corp logo on the bottom. There's not much more to say about that ad here, but I'm taking this opportunity to wax a bit poetic and expansively about Mego in general and some of the cool people out there that have really helped raise the profile of that company during the dark times. We do have a link that we'll provide to a YouTube capture of the original TV commercial for these 2 toys, which is always fun to see. And I'll also take this, like, again, this is going to be kind of a little mini Mego commercial here, a little ad within the ads. When they talk about magnetic hands and feet on these dolls, and they are dolls, people. All right, there's a little tangent I want to go off on because it popped up and it was something I never saw, and for very good reason. So I'm going to go off on a little magnetic Mego tangent over to, they had another line called the Magna Heroes and Magna Micronauts and so forth. And these were very different. And I won't go into detail on them here in full. I'll just say that these were figures with magnetic switchable limbs and heads. So you could make whatever you wanted. You could swap all the parts in and out using magnets. Now, someone who goes into much better detail about all of this than me is a guy sometimes known as Brick Mantooth. He's actually Brian Heiler of the PlaidStallions.com, Toy Fair magazine, and he runs the website for the Mego Museum. He has videos about both of the lines, and again, I have YouTube links for that. The original Magna Heroes never released in the US, but we have one photo of the 4 main Magna Heroes. You have Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, and the Hulk. But the bigger line that was used with these magnets and interchangeable limbs was, of course, the magnetic Micronauts. So post adding Force Commander and Karza to the lineup, the idea kind of took off. So we have a little photo of one catalog page that we'll add to the album there of some of the magnetic or the Magna Micronauts. In the US, Mego also did a relaunch later on of the magnetic Micronauts in a line called the Interchangeables, which I found a picture of one box that has almost all of them in a collector's box set here, or at least pictures of them all in the back. But again, I direct you to Brian Heiler's ultra informative and super cool sites, PlaidStallions.com, where I first saw that site way back in the early 2000s when it was just like, hey, look at these goofy catalog pictures of people wearing clothes from the 70s, hey, that kind of thing. And it grew from there to kind of embrace Brian's action figure collecting and his deep knowledge of all these toys we grew up with that weren't necessarily big hits, like the Micronauts and stuff like that. And the Mego action figures that were kind of dying off by the time people in our generation were coming of age and collecting toys. I certainly had some. I had the Mego Star Trek figures and the Enterprise playset. And I also have in the closet in my bedroom here, I have a Mego Thing, that I found in a comic shop where his rocky skin is just a cloth suit. And I freaking love it. It's not in very great shape, but I love it. So you can go to plaidstallions.com. Brian also runs megomuseum.com. And there's also the official Mego site, megofigures.com. And I mention all this because Mego was in limbo for a long time. And because of fans like Brian and other people and certain efforts, they are fully back in operation these days and cranking out new figures and new toys. And it is really cool to walk through like a Target or a Walmart or whatever and see new Migos on the shelf. I don't necessarily have room for them, but it has been really cool to see. I'm a little less psyched about their new kids toy they just announced, which is an update of their old robot kids toy, and it's powered by OpenAI. But I'll let that sit because the good that they're doing and the Phoenix uprising that Migo's been having, I'm just hoping that AI toy kind of comes out in the market and disappears. But anyway, there's a lot of stuff for you to go check out, including that TV commercial for the magnetic hands, Batman and Robin. So that is my mini Mego symposium coming to an end.
Speaking of mini, new HO scale military figures made of durable, non-toxic plastic from master molds handcrafted in Italy. Set up your own war games, build your own dioramas, command your own troops. All figures, guns, tanks have incredible detail and are cast to authentic HO scale, the same as model trains. You could build a whole collection of soldiers, sailors, and marines. Armies of different countries, complete with tanks, artillery, jeeps, and military equipment. Ask to see the complete Atlantic line at your favorite toy or hobby store. Also available, Far West figures, HO scale figures that recreate the thrilling sagas of Buffalo Bill, Geronimo, Davy Crockett, Custer's Last Stand, the Gold Rush days, complete with forts, wagon trains, and Wild West towns. Click them all. Ancient civilizations, set up for battle with Egyptian chariot-drawn cavalry. Relive the days at Pharaoh's court, the Sphinx, and the Nile. Recreate Greek life at the Acropolis, or the legend of Ulysses and the Trojan horse. Collect Roman gladiators. Why are these things italicized like that? Complete with arms and armor, catapults, and siege towers. There's so much to do, so much fun for the asking, with everything in realistic HO scale. It's the usual, here's my $1 rush by HO scale, soldier plaque, catalog, store list, blah, 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 blah. So the top half of the ad is a black and white picture of vehicles, figures, boxes of everything comes in, etc. And on the far right are actual size drawings of the figures. My dad had a HO scale layout in the basement of the 1940s New York Central system that's the size of my family room. And I kept one of the engines for remembrance purposes. I immediately thought that these actual size drawings were too big, and I held up the ad to the engine while script writing. Yeah, these guys ain't fitting in the cab. Shave off about a quarter inch. Still, I guess the purpose is to give you a rough idea how big these are. So fine. And from my dad's setup, I know you could probably whip up a really nice battlefield with figures this size. So, okay.
So my question is, what does HO mean?
HO means quite literally half O. There's an O scale that is twice the size of HO. It's another size of train layout.
All right, I never knew what that
there's
meant.
there's about 5 or 6 different sizes. There's sizes that are like itty bitty, teeny tiny. Like where like the layout is like the size of like a train ornament hanging on your Christmas tree. And then they got like HO and O. They got some some engines that are like the size of like a freaking shoebox or something.
All
So
right.
there's about 4 or 5 different sizes of layout.
Yes,
So
I
yeah.
just heard that term on the periphery of everything my whole life, and I never stopped to wonder what's it stand for. So cool.
Well, HO is a handy scale. That's why my dad went all in on it because it's small enough that it doesn't take up a boatload of room, but it's big enough that you have details and you could appreciate the scales and the detail and everything else. So
Right
so yeah
on.
so so yeah, like I said, like I've talked about my dad a little bit in passing, and he had a layout in the attic of his parents' house in Iskuna, and he had this, like I said, this layout the size of my family room in the house I grew up in that he had to cut into 3 pieces and move to the new house. The movers must have loved that.
Yeah, I've stood in the presence of that train setup, people, and it was fantastic. You could just walk around that and look at find details and look at stuff for hours. It was so freaking cool.
It was never done. It was always one more thing, one more thing, one more thing. I mean, it was just as you know, but my mom had to sell the house because of my dad's condition and everything, and watching because my dad said when the time comes, he said sell everything, for money and stuff. And I took an engine, my son took an engine, but that was rough. That was very, very hard. Watching vendors come in, dealers, and just taking the buildings off the layout, taking the trains off the layout, just collecting everything and putting it in boxes and just carting it away. That was very hard. I won't lie.
That's what happens to all of our stuff. And like, when a shop gets a big new injection of war comics or something, you kind of know why. But he had the joy of putting all that together, and we got to go down there and stand there and marvel at it and not freaking touch it. At least in my
Well, we
case.
could we could run it. I mean,
Yeah. I mean,
but
but
my
I
Mike's
wasn't gonna touch anything.
well, yeah, just I got pictures of like my son and my niece and stuff like that. As small children, sitting on his lap, just just watching the engines going around the layout and everything. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I
it
can
was.
I can understand why your dad would have taken one look at me back then and went like, just give me the look like, yeah, man, just let Rich do stuff.
So, you got any last words? Another good all-around book, in my honest opinion. I gotta stick with Ghost Patrol for nostalgia, but there are no real duds here.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I carped on the second two-thirds of the book, I honestly had a fun time with all of the offerings here. And it definitely ranks as a comic book that put me in a good mood. So, mission accomplished all around, really. I, of course, got to give top honors to the opening story in this one because of my gold key bias, known and admitted bias. But I bet you all guessed that already. So, there you go. An all around enjoyable issue of Weird War Tales, finished and talked about. That brings us to the scuttlebutt part of the show where we take care of odds and ends. And I remind you that we have an incredibly cool Facebook page. It's the Weird Warriors Podcast Facebook page run by my esteemed co host, Rich. And we have merch that you can buy. Well, redbubble.com has the merch, but what you can put on that merch is our incredibly cool, again, we have a lot of incredibly cool things. Logo drawn and designed by Bill Walko of theherobusiness.com and of Archie Comics fame. You can put that logo on any of redbubble.com's merch, get it sent to you, take a picture of the merch, send it to the Facebook page via Facebook Messenger. And if you do all that, you'll get a Sam Star from Rich. All right? It's really cool. You want one, and we shouldn't have any left. All right. We also have something that I actually recently added to, I promise, our YouTube page. It's the Weird Warriors Podcast YouTube page where I am putting up audio of every episode as I get to them on the page with a picture of the comic we're talking about. You don't have to watch us on video, people. Don't worry, I'll never let that happen. I've got like 70 videos up there now. So if you want to listen to stuff on YouTube, if that's just the way you prefer to do it, if you have a YouTube premium account like I do and you want to get some mileage out of it, you can listen to the Weird Warriors podcast on YouTube now. So that's my part of the scuttlebutt. And this is the part where I put the mic down and let you get to the fun part of the scuttlebutt, the part where Rich tells you stuff.
AKA Free Plug Volume 4. Excellent Adventures Comics was founded in 1986, currently residing at 110 Milton Avenue, Ballston Spa, New York. ExcellentAdventuresComics.com. The store features old and new comics, collectibles related to comics, and comic characters. They've been buying and selling comics for over 30 years and specialize in vintage comics from 1933 to 75. They also carry toys, statues, action figures, big little books, magazines, pulps, premiums, movie posters, memorabilia, comic supplies, and many other baby, boomer, and paper collectibles. Of all the local shops, this is the one I've had the most success filling holes in the collection at. Good store. So, there's only one thing left. It's a teaser for the next episode. Look at the calendar. You know what time it is. Our 100th episode by our admittedly imperfect count, and we're celebrating by turning on some soft music and lighting some candles. Oh, yeah, baby. We're coming in slow and easy for our third annual vintage romance military comic episode on Valentine's Day. Screw dinner. Curl up with the one you love and listen to us discuss GI War Brides number 3 from 1954.
And are people ready for that much romance? Can the Earth handle another giant baby boom that this will probably cause? I don't know. Yeah, 100th episode by essentially Podbean's count, which we're going to stick with for marking milestones and whatnot. But what better way? What more accidentally funny and appropriate way to land on our 100th episode than by landing on a Valentine's Day romance comic episode? I can't believe it turned out that way. That's so cool.
Well, we admittedly, like I said, because we weren't counting some of the Road Warriors episodes. So that kind of at first, and now we are. So that kind of threw off the count a little bit. Podbean counts our promos as episodes, which they're not. So there's a little bit of a back and forth there.
Yeah,
But
it
by
makes
our
perfect sense that with our show, there's some shenanigans involved. Like, yeah, in the beginning, I thought I was going to be fancy and have the Road Warriors not part of the episode count, and then I was like, that would take a little tiny bit of effort, so I'm not going to do that.
and it took me a while for me to notice that he did that. So I'm like,
Yep.
so I had to go back through some of the albums and stuff and tweak episode numbers and stuff like that. So
I like to keep him busy, folks. And who am I? Right? I'm one of the co-hosts of this podcast. I'm one of the Weird Warriors. I'm one of the Battling Bros. And what do I do all that on? I do all that on the Weird Warriors podcast. And that, as you may have figured out by now, is a podcast on which Rich and I promise to make war.
yeah, boy.